officially. I practiced over the weekend. But it's an interesting process, and I'm going to have to mute myself when I do this. Otherwise, I'm going to get feedback. Done this officially. I practiced. There we go. All right. All right, so let's get started. The biggest challenge was reassuring employees. Yes. Cool. Thanks, Winga. Winga is joining us from Brussels, actually. So you've got the Europeans on the line as well, Marissa.
Actually, this is global, right?
This is global.
So actually, let's ask them if people could just put in the chat where they're from too.
Oh, that would be great. Yes.
Yeah.
Where are you joining us from? And where you are joining us from. There we go. You're getting them.
Awesome.
Cool. All right, so let's get started. We've got a good group on the line. Welcome to CEO Think Tank's first webinar of the fourth quarter. I'm very excited to be welcoming Marissa Levin to our group of thought leaders. Marissa and I actually met through Scaling Up. She came and spoke to the Scaling Up coaches maybe a year and a half ago, Marissa?
Yeah, for the main stage for Vern's event as well as for the coaches.
Yeah, and actually spoke on one of her books, Built to Scale, which I've got here. And initially we were going to have her talk about that pre-COVID. And then all this stuff happened. And when Marissa and I connected a few months back to talk about her being a speaker for us, she talked about her GRACE model, which actually I'll let you speak about how it all came about.
Yeah.
And but let me just give you a little bit of her background. Marissa's a 27-year entrepreneur. She's a speaker. She's a growth strategist, and her lifetime legacy mission is to educate, equip, and empower 100 million entrepreneurs and leaders with the skill sets and mindsets that they need to reach their greatest potential. Her entrepreneurial journey began around the same time as mine did, back in 1995, when she launched Information Experts, a strategic communication and education firm. She ended up growing that to about $13 million in revenue. And then she resigned and started in 2012 Successful Culture, which is a leadership consulting organization that helps CEOs master the three most critical aspects of business growth: leadership development, strategy formulation, and execution, as well as organizational culture. And she's been doing a lot of work in that arena as well over the past few months.
We are busy.
Yeah.
As people
and again, I'm not going to take too much more time on the introductions because I really do want to pass it along to you. But just for those of you that are joining us again logistically, we'd love to know the biggest challenge that you faced in the communication area. That would help us. We'd love to know where you're calling in from. And if you can please put reflections and takeaways and comments in the chat, and then put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to that at the end.
Yeah.
Marissa, I'll let you take it away and
great.
The screen.
And we've got content that what I would like to do is to be able to go to 12:15 for this content, and then what I want to do is I want to open it up for questions. Part of what I do, I'll go over what my background is. I mean, I work with CEOs, extensively with their growth strategies, and obviously everything that's been going on with their organizations. They've had massive cultural shifts. So a lot of what I'm doing with my clients is helping them figure out how to bring employees back, and what that looks like from a cultural perspective, a leadership perspective. So we'll have time at the end, and I can share some best practices of things that we're seeing. And if people have questions about how they can be bringing their employees back, what that looks like, I'm happy to kind of do some quick on-the-spot coaching for anyone who's on the call if they want to bring some of their challenges. So if we've got that time, I'm happy to help with that as well.
Thank you.
No, of course. So I'm going to share my screen. Can you go ahead and give me screen sharing, please?
Yeah. Hold on. Let me just do this. There we go. Sorry, Marissa. There we go. You're
All good, all good. Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about today is this GRACE model that I created, and just a really quick 30-second backstory on how it came up. The way my brain works is I'm constantly kind of coming up with different models of how people and organizations can work together. It's just the way I'm wired neurologically. And I happen to be in New York with our younger son, who is 20, the last day before everything shut down. I didn't get Mother of the Year. I took him to New York, literally in the middle of a pandemic, to see a Broadway play. And as we were driving home from New York to Virginia on the New Jersey Turnpike, I was thinking about what is it that leaders need from a leadership and a communications perspective. And my word for 2020 before all this happened was grace. And that's really what popped into my mind. And the acronym GRIT, Resilience, Adaptability, Connection, and Empathy just came to me. It was just something that I just received, or, I found it within myself, and I thought, this is exactly what leaders need. And so, on that 4-hour ride home from New York, I literally created a complete framework and model. I had messaged my graphic designer, told her what I needed. I got home at 6:30 that night. I had a logo in my inbox, and I spent all night up basically creating a new framework that we've now rolled out to thousands of different leaders through hundreds of organizations worldwide. So it's been a real gift for me to be able to equip leaders with the skills and the knowledge they need to truly lead and communicate with grace as we move through this new time in our lives. So what we're going to talk about today is I'll introduce the GRACE model. We'll go into detail on the 5 components, which is grit, resilience, adaptability, connection, and empathy. I'll provide some best practices, and then I've got a nice library of resources. And throughout this, there will be opportunities for you to do some self-reflection. And as I direct you to do those exercises, as you come back, what will be great is for you to provide the answers to the questions that you're going to see in the chat box. We all know that when we're in a group setting, we have the opportunity to be both teacher and student in any moment. And so I'm asking you, and I'm extending the invitation to you to step into that role as both teacher and student. And when you do your own reflection, think about how your experiences and perspectives could potentially help some of the other people on the line. So the GRACE model, the way it came out, to be is really, when I thought about it, it focuses on the 3 major components of any organization. In any organization, you've got the leader's self-leadership, you've got the organizational leadership at the macro level, and then you have leadership of others, the other people who are in the organization that you might be leading. So under self-leadership, that's where we're going to put, and we're going to focus on the grit and resilience. How do you dig deep to access your own grit and your own resilience? And a lot of people think that these are the same things. They're not the same things. The second thing is organizational leadership. So how do you as a leader be adaptable and be ready truly to pivot when you need to, so that you don't face obsolescence? And how do you help the people in your organization embrace the idea of adaptability? In my first company, when I was running that, which I got to about 15 million, I had to pivot that 7 different times in order to stay relevant. And that was definitely my biggest lesson. And I knew when we were all kind of going into this COVID world, I knew that so many entrepreneurs were going to have a really hard time of letting go of what is, or letting go of what could have been, and embracing the space that was opening up to be able to welcome what could be. So that was a big piece of it. And then finally, leadership of others. How do we maintain strong connections to those that we lead, especially when everybody is remote and under very, very stressful circumstances? And how do you lead with empathy? And we're going to talk about the differences between empathy and compassion, and the 2 types of empathy that leaders should be aware of. One you want to lead with, and one you don't want to lead with. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. So we're going to start with grit. Now, grit is a word that is thrown around a lot. Grit is really what we have inside ourselves that we have to dig deep and find to move through the difficulty. I do a lot of spinning and cycling. And when I'm on my cycle bike, at home, and the instructor tells us to turn up the volume, the resistance to 28, 30, 32, that's when I have to dig deep and get gritty to be able to push through that mud, to be able to push through that quicksand, to make sure that I'm getting from where I am to where I want to be. And the grit shows up when we are passionate about something that is a long-term goal or a meaningful goal. And we have to really, really find it within ourselves to find that strength that we may not think we have to be able to get there. It is an internal drive that keeps us on a task for a sustained period of time. Now, many of you probably know who Angela Duckworth is. She is the expert on grit. She's done decades-long studies on grit, looking at people who come from all socioeconomic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, education levels. And what she has found in all of her research is that it is not those that have accomplished the greatest degrees, or the people who come from the most money, or who are even naturally intelligent. It is truly the people that have that wherewithal to dig deep when things get difficult. And as business owners that are on the line, if you had a choice of hiring someone who had the perfect pedigree, but really didn't have a lot of life experience, kind of had led a sheltered life, or someone who came in and had a good degree, but maybe didn't do the Ivy League track, but on their resume or in their history, you could tell that they really pushed hard to get from one level to the next, either in a personal or professional goal. Which one would you trust with your company? Which one would you trust when things get really hard? It's going to be the person that has the grit. So Angela defines grit as the ability to stick with things that are important to you and bounce back from failure. This is the essential component of success, independent of and beyond what talent and intelligence contribute. Now, the other side of the coin is resilience. The resilience is what builds after you've gone through the difficulty. So you've experienced the grit, you've developed the grit, and once you've come through it, that is where your resilience emerges. And I purposely picked the graphic with the tree because so many of us have been in places where we were sure we were going to be broken. And yet we find the ability to rise again. So this is when we can really develop that mental and emotional stamina to cope with crisis. None of us have gotten to where we are right now without having life bringing us to our knees in one way or another. Perhaps it's an illness or a loss, a death or a loss of someone that we love. Perhaps it's a relationship challenge. Perhaps it's a financial challenge, or a devastation. Perhaps you're going through it right now with your business, or even kind of doing some introspection about why are you here and what are you supposed to be doing and what is your purpose and how do you fit into the larger framework. These are all things that help us build resilience. And it's that optimism that we feel after we have experienced the setbacks. That's the resilience. And the thing about grit and resilience is that we could all attend as many programs, that are available. I can tell you that this summer, from March until October, I have listened to 17 books on Audible. I do a lot of spirituality work. I've been, in the mindfulness and meditation space for over 2 decades. And, for me, going through this whole transition and having the opportunity to pause and reflect about where I'm going and what matters to me, I basically created my own MBA in consciousness this summer. And what that did is that was what I tapped into to make sure that my resilience was strong as we move through this difficulty. So how are you developing the optimism and the grit so that you can move through your difficulties. And that's what we're going to talk about on the next slide after this quote. And this is just something that I love to think about, that although the world is full of suffering, it's also full of the overcoming of that suffering. And I think we've all been in this situation long enough to know that there is tremendous suffering and there is tremendous uncertainty and ambiguity, but there are also so many beautiful silver linings that are coming out of this. And what we focus on, that's what expands. Where our focus goes, energy flows. And we have a choice in any moment to decide what we choose to see and what we choose to look at and look for. So remember that as you're looking at the world and you're filtering what you see through your lens, what are you choosing to see? So we've got some questions on the screen. These are 4 different questions. And what we're going to do is I'm going to just have you take a couple of minutes, and I'll leave this up on the screen. Pick one question that resonates with you. Don't give it, a ton of thought of whichever one speaks to you right now, and answer those questions. And if you can, share them in the chat, because this is where we can learn from one another and we can be both teacher and student in the same moment. So take a few minutes, and I'm really looking forward to seeing some of your answers, and we'll be able to take you guys off mute and even contribute to a discussion. Cheryl, can you make sure that everybody can see the answers?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and Katie actually asked if oh, did I want to be able to see the chat? All I can see are your comments. Katie actually asked,
There we go. People are posting.
yeah. Remember, folks, you need to post to all panelists and attendees, which Annette just did a lovely job of doing.
Thank you, Megan.
And Megan just said just post to the panelists. So I'm trying to make sure that everybody knows. There we go. Thanks, Katie.
Thanks, Joseph. Yep, not everything has to be solved in that moment. Just do the next step. Yep, self-compassion. I'm going to be talking about that later, Eileen. Thank you, Michael, for putting that in the Q&A. Add positive and self-motivated employees and remove negative and toxic employees from my company. Yeah, I've written a lot about that. I write for Inc. magazine as well, and I've done several articles on the financial and the cultural impact of toxic employees.
These are great questions, Marissa, just for
Thank
people
you.
to make as part of their team meetings, their leadership team meetings, as they're going into Q4 or maybe at a monthly.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I wanted to put several in. These, the value of this deck will extend far beyond today for all of us, to do this type of introspection, either solo or with our team, or even with our, with our families. It's a great conversation to have around the dinner table too about grit and resilience.
Mhm.
I like Headspace. I also, I use Insight Timer a lot too. That's a really good one.
It's called Insight Timer.
Yeah, Insight Timer. It's really good. It's got about 50,000 free guided meditations. It's got music. It's got audio programming, and a lot of experts do a lot of live streaming on events. It's really good.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm. And there is always good in every situation. I say that while not every day is a good day, every day has some goodness in it. These are great. And we'll save the chat, and we'll make sure that everybody gets a copy of the chat as well, so
Yep.
that we can work, revert back to it. All right, let's just take a couple more minutes on this before we move on to adaptability. If you want to go ahead and contribute your voice to this conversation, we would love that. All right, let's move on to adaptability. But if, at any moment, if you want to go ahead and add, just go ahead now. The chat's open for you. Okay, so the next part of the GRACE model is adaptability, which we all know is the quality of being able to adjust to new conditions. And we all also know that is a lot easier said than done. And, I'll share some of my experiences when I was running Information Experts. As I mentioned, I had to pivot that company 7 times in response to market changes. It's primarily when I was running it, the company was a government contracting firm. We were in about 14 different federal agencies. And when you are a government contractor, regardless of what product or service you provide, you are really at the mercy of the presidential and the congressional agendas. So when there is a change in administration, you have to be willing and ready to respond to the changes of the priorities, because both parties prioritize different things. The Democratic Party does prioritize more of the civil agencies. So under the Democratic administrations, agencies such as Environmental Protection Agency, FDIC, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, agencies that had to do with those types of services received very heavy funding. And then under the Republican administration, traditionally, it's more of the defense and agencies that end up getting funded, like, all of our armed forces. So really, as a leader, whenever there was an election year leading up to that, we had to be very specific about our strategies. There was always a lot of juggling of what we did, making sure that we were getting ready for our services to be relevant to the decisions that were being made, in Congress and in the administration. So I got very used to being adaptable. Another thing that happened when I was running Information Experts is when I first started it, my master's degree is in organizational development and curriculum design. And my company started as an instructor-led classroom-based training firm. That is, that's where the industry was when I started the company 27 years ago. There was no e-learning or online learning or web-based training. And it wasn't until John Chambers, who was the CEO of Cisco at the time, that he made an announcement that said, he told everybody that e-learning would be, quote unquote, the killer application of the internet. And from the moment he said that, my entire industry shifted. Overnight, I had to go from being an instructor-led classroom-based training service provider to being a provider of online learning, e-learning, web-based training. And I always say, when you're building your first company, it's like building a plane while you're flying it. I had to just make decisions in real time. I had to hire people that had different skills, not only from the skills that my employees had, but had different skills from me. So I had to really go out of my comfort zone, and I had to change the entire infrastructure of my company to basically become a technology organization. And if I wouldn't have done that shift, I definitely would have gone out of business, because the industry swung from all classroom-based instructor-led training all the way to the right to being an e-learning and online learning for company. And then it swung back to center, as things always happen in life. It stabilized, and blended learning really became the model, where everything was kind of a combination of paper and online learning. So being able to not only see what is happening in your own company and the shifts that you have to make in your own company, but being able to look out at the landscape and being able to pivot really in a moment. It doesn't matter how good our products and services are, if they're not relevant, you're going to go out of business. And so that's why it's important for leaders never to drink too much of their own Kool-Aid, because they can get very deceived into thinking that no matter what they're providing, it will last through anything that's going on outside of the organization. And that usually is not the case. So being adaptable, it's definitely a mindset. And I think that it's also a muscle, that the more we are thrown curveballs, the stronger we get in our adaptability. And as leaders, your employees are looking to you to see how comfortable you are with uncertainty, to see how comfortable you are with change. If you're giving the impression that the sky is falling, that you have a lot of insecurity about where things are going, that energy and that vibe is going to reverberate in your organization. So it's very important that as a leader, you find ways to lean into the uncertainty and lean into the ambiguity and embrace the unknown. And when you do that, that's when the creative juices kind of start to flow. When we're in a place of anxiety or fear, or just being in a place that makes us very uncomfortable, that we consider kind of like the dark, what happens is that our brains go into survival mode. And when we're in survival mode, we cannot create. And so whatever you need to be doing to get comfortable, and this is where the meditation can come in. There's so many different meditations on the art of surrender, leaning into what's happening, having an open mind, expanding your lens, expanding your perspective. I've seen so much creativity come from so many leaders offering products and services that they never would have ever considered providing if it wasn't for the COVID era. So what are you doing to, strengthen your adaptability muscle, encourage adaptability in your organizations, giving employees the opportunity to rise to the occasion and perhaps, apply skills that they otherwise didn't apply, or step into leadership roles, or become more autonomous? There's lots of ways that you can be infusing adaptability into your organization. And I think, for this slide, the most important thing is what I put on the bottom, and that's that environments, relationships, company needs, they all change literally in an instant, as we've learned. But the constant in all of this is you. So we're going to do a little bit of Q&A, or not Q&A, we're going to do a little bit of introspection on adaptability. And here are the questions that I've put up here, and take a few minutes and go ahead and share your insights and your strategies with your fellow leaders here on the call. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you add.
And the same thing here, Marissa, you want them to pick a question to respond to?
Yeah, pick one question, or, two questions, whatever you feel called to go ahead and put it in the chat, the answers.
So what do you recommend? Some people are obviously more wired to be adaptable, right? What we know from brain science. For those folks that aren't, or might be more control oriented.
Yeah.
Are there you've already talked about meditation, but what other tools and resources are available?
So I think one of my favorite books, you're really asking about the concept of surrendering, surrendering to what is. And from my own experience, both in personal and professional life, I have found that when we're able to let go, the sooner that we can let go and mourn what no longer is, the quicker we're able to make room for what is coming. And if you think about our energy, when we cling to something that, is slipping away from us, or, we had a dream and now with everything happening, clearly that's not going to happen. The sooner we can let go of that, that energy frees up for us to be able to create what's possible. So, I think a lot of it does come from experience, but it really is a mourning process. It's grief. It really is following the whole 5 stages of grief, with, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. It really does follow the stages of grief. And we have to honor that within ourselves and make sure that we are giving ourselves self-compassion in these moments of change, and doing what we can to nurture our bodies, make sure that we're engaging in really good habits. I eat really well. I make sure my sleep is a priority. I don't drink alcohol. I'm really careful about not bringing in negative content into my life. I have a very strict content diet. I basically watch what I need to know to make sure I'm informed, but I'm aware of what my triggers are, and I don't obsess over the news at all. So I think it's just being very aware of what your triggers are, keeping a tight container that's healthy around you, surrounding yourself with other people, recognizing that it's not only okay, it's good to go out for help and seek out help from other peers and people who you can gather strength from. So these are all things that we can be doing. So I'm seeing Janet wrote, I think I'm realizing I'm not not sure why, maybe pride or ego. Yeah, Janet, that's a really good self-realization. And it could be, the ego, it really is difficult to let go of once what was, and, to make space for what no longer is. I can recommend 2 sources. I'm not sure they're in my library. The first one is The Surrender Experiment, the book, The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. And I'll go ahead and add that. And also Rob Bell has a podcast, and that is called the Robcast. He is an amazing spiritual leader. He's got millions of followers, and he has a specific podcast. I think it's episode 115. Can you tell I've listened to it a lot? And it's called Seasons. And the whole premise of it is that everything in our life really is a season. And so when we can look at that everything is impermanent, which is a Buddhist concept, we're able again to surrender into what is in front of us and to let go. So those are a couple additional resources that I don't think are in there. And then there's another meditation. One of my favorite meditative teachers is Sarah Blondin, and she's not only on Insight Timer. If you just Google her name, Sarah Blondin, she has a meditation called, I think it's about surrender. If you Google the surrender meditation for Sarah Blondin, it's really beautiful. Yeah. And in fact, I'm just finishing up her book now, her new book, which is also on Audible, and it's called Heart Minded.
I found it. Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. That's a good
Okay.
one.
I'm just adding this so you guys will have this.
These are great.
Those are a few additional resources. Rob Bell, Michael Singer, Sarah Blondin, reaching out beyond things that typically you may not seek out or listen to, so that you can learn how to fully lean into what's happening.
It really looks like a number of people like Chris, talks about having been wired to embrace change, and Todd said he's trained himself to embrace change.
Yeah.
Thanks, Carla. Thanks, Eileen. Thanks, Katie, for getting us started on this conversation.
Thank you, Chris, for providing that. Really appreciate the vulnerability and the self-awareness. Leaning into the vulnerability during this time is really important. Remember that what we resist persists. And I'll go ahead and type that in there too. Okay, anyone want to?
So this would be another, what I'm thinking, again, going into Q4, right? To sit down with your team, your leadership team, and talk about what's one thing that each of them is going to do or potentially read, listen to,
Yeah.
to help them develop this faculty.
Yeah. I actually am working with a client now who's standing up one of their universities, and they're a wealth management firm. They're a very large wealth management firm, and they're busy. And we really want to continue to build the culture of learning in there. And so what I shared with them is, one thing, if everybody does just one thing, it will move the ball forward exponentially, right? So it's not about, and look, my company provides a lot of online education and training and the courses that are relevant now. That's one way to go. But another way to go is everybody commits to one podcast, or one book, or just one new practice. And if everybody moves the ball forward by 1 degree in an organization, the shift can be a quantum shift. So it's creating that culture and that mindset of continuous evolution and learning that matters.
Great.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on now to the connection and empathy piece. So how do we maintain connection to our employees? As someone had posted when we initially started, that one of the challenges was that their employees had a lot of fear about being terminated. And that is just, that's completely reasonable and realistic in this environment because we're dealing with so many unknowns. And what we have found in our client organizations, and, we're dealing with even some publicly traded companies, leaders are being asked to lead in a way that they've never been asked to lead before, ever. I mean, usually the leaders have all the answers, right? They don't have all the answers here. They are managing and leading workforces that are all at home. And not only are they at home, which happens a lot with organizations that embrace remote learning, they're at home under duress, right? They've got financial insecurity. They've got health worries about their entire family or their extended family. They are dealing with helping children do remote learning at school. They are with family members nonstop, 24/7. So there are a lot of stressors. And then you have all of the information that's coming to us. You've got all the social unrest. You've got the political unrest. We're seeing systems all around us crumble. We're seeing, especially, with us being business owners, we're seeing our friends and our colleagues really suffer and lose their life's work if they own certain types of businesses. I mean, I know so many restaurant owners and clothing store owners and retail operators that, they did everything right. It's not like they didn't do everything right. They've done everything right and they're losing their life's work. And that affects us when we see that happening. So there's a lot of, difficulty around us right now, and leaders don't know how to navigate that. And so this type of model, reminding us how to dig into our grit and our resilience and how to step into a place of apathy. And now we're going to talk about the connection and empathy. This is what allows leaders to be vulnerable and strong at the same time. What I'm advising our clients to do is to be transparent, to say, I don't have all the answers and I'm in this with you and I'm figuring it out. And hey, as we figure out how to bring people back with plexiglass and sterilization and decontamination and all, all of that, I'm just figuring it out. And by the way, it might be different next week, because one of the things I want to mention is, all of our organizations have lots of policies for PTO and bereavement leave and paternity and maternity leave and sick leave and all these other things that are legally required, and they are set in stone. It's very black and white. It's in an employee manual. They're driven by compliance and by the law. Where we are right now is totally uncharted territory, and it's driven by fear. There's no standard at all. So what might be happening today in an organization, 3 weeks from now, it might look totally different. They might find that what they thought was right actually didn't work, and they might need to change it. And so through all of this change, this is why it's so important for leaders to make a conscious effort to remain connected with their employees. And how do we do that? We don't just call them when we need something. We make sure that we're staying connected with them on a human level and reminding ourselves that the human connection is nothing more than an energy exchange. And it's through people that are paying attention to one another. That's what connection is. And it is one of the most important drivers of longevity. So one of my favorite people about connection is Brene Brown. And she talks about connection as being the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they drive sustenance and strength from a relationship. And when your employees feel that you see them, that you hear them, that you are a safe place for them, they're going to double down with their commitment and loyalty and dedication to the organization, because they know that you have their back. This is why intentional connection is so key when you're managing people in this environment. It's always been important, but it's even more important now. So the E is for empathy. And this is the capacity to understand what another person is experiencing from their frame of reference, to be able to put someone in another person's position. Now, there are two types of empathy, and you may be familiar with this, you may not. One is the cognitive empathy, and that's where we're able to take perspective to be able to really understand what other people are feeling. The other one is emotional empathy. And this is where the idea of empaths come along. And I'm an empath, which is definitely a double-edged sword. And it's our ability to not only understand other people, but to feel their pain too. And compassion is empathy supplemented with the desire to help. Now, the whole idea of empathy, it is something that we can learn and we can develop, but it's actually wired in our brains. We are programmed to be empathetic. And it's only when life really kind of hardens us that we lose our ability to be empathetic. So what's really important from a leadership perspective is not to fall into the place of emotional empathy, where you feel that you are in the problem with your employee or with the people that you're managing. What we want to achieve as a leader is cognitive empathy with compassion. And that's where we're able to have a little bit of distance and we're able to understand their perspective, but we're far enough away that we're not consumed with the feeling of helplessness. And then we have that desire to help. Because emotional leadership that's driven with emotional empathy can be exhausting. Mm-hmm. Compassionate leadership doesn't have to be. So if you've got nothing else from this whole presentation, as you think about how you lead your people, think about whether or not you are leading from a place of emotional empathy or cognitive empathy. And if you find that you're a little bit too involved and that, you kind of get consumed with how the other people are feeling, think how you can kind of step back to give yourself some emotional distance. And that's how you can be your highest service. It's not being in it with them. It's having enough distance so that you can have perspective and provide support. Super important difference.
So Marissa, this is a really great conversation because we actively use StrengthsFinder, Gallup's StrengthsFinder in our work
Mhm.
with leaders. And as you probably know, empathy is one of the talents, is one of the strengths that they measure. And we do have a number of leaders who have that empathy talent, which is the one that you described, where you actually can feel the pain of another or the joy of another, and as you said, it's a double-edged sword, and
Mhm.
it's been a really difficult time for a lot of them as they try and practice distancing when it's
Mhm.
not in their wiring. So as someone who has that as well, like, what do you recommend? How can they achieve that, or how can they manage that? Or how do they do self-care to manage it? I mean, I don't know what the answer is.
Well, and the self-care is definitely really important for all of this. And because one of my favorite sayings is that you can't pour from an empty cup,
Mhm.
right? So if we're constantly giving and giving and giving, and we're not doing the recharging and the restoration of ourselves, we're not able to support other people. So it is very important to recognize that we are all pandemic weary.
Mhm.
We're COVID weary. And what research has shown is that once people hit kind of like a 6 month mark with something, their stamina and their tolerance for a difficult situation drastically drops. And
Mm.
so we now are at that 6 month. There's something about that milestone that we think that things will be better, or that things will have resolved themselves. And when we move past that 6 month mark and things are either the same or they're worse or there's no end in sight, it does take a psychological toll on us. And so we have to be really aware of that.
Well, and again, another great conversation, right, for our leaders to be having with their leaders
Hmm.
is again going into the fourth quarter. What kinds of self-care are they
Right. Yeah.
practice?
And a lot of the work that we're doing with our clients right now is from the leaders is look, they're bringing people back, and
Mm.
conversations that are going to be going on in the workplace are going to be really volatile, and people are exhausted and they have short fuses. So we're training our leaders on how to navigate really sensitive, complex situations and conversations, and how do they stay above it
Mhm.
rather than getting into it, and how do they diffuse emotions, because people are nervous about coming back to begin with, and they're coming back to a new environment that has a lot more stress around it. They have to figure out how to engage and exchange with people in a whole new way. They're now leaving their homes, and they're worried about bringing potentially COVID back into their homes because they're opening up their bubble. There's a lot of angst around bringing people back right now, and being able to equip leaders with the skills, which is exactly why I created Grace, on how to communicate and lead with grace. That's why I rolled this out.
Mhm.
So
Thank you.
yeah, so here are the questions we're going to do. This is our last exercise to look at connection and empathy and how that shows up in your life, either you needing connection and empathy or how you're able to support others. So go ahead and take a few minutes and add your answers to the chat.
Mm. Love it, Carla.
You got it.
Even that question, I think that's from something from Pat Lencioni, but maybe not that a whole idea of just asking people, what does support look like for you, right? Recognizing that we're all different.
Mm-hmm.
For some of us, like my very introverted husband, support means that I'm just leaving him to introvert.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people have figured out they're an introvert. Yeah, Eileen, you're not alone. Yeah, I mean, there's so many places to go for support. I know I'm a member of a couple of really phenomenal organizations, Cadre, which is now a national organization, as well as Maverick. Got my friend Chris here online with me from Maverick. Really, really phenomenal organizations for entrepreneurs. So making sure that you're surrounded by people who are who think like you and view the world like you is really helpful. Yeah, Joseph, absolutely. Talk about the non-work things.
Mhm. Yes, I'm surrounded by introverts in my home life, Chris.
Thanks for sharing that, Chris.
And I love your third question, Marissa, about does it make you comfortable or uncomfortable?
Yeah. Yeah, Katie, I agree with you. And that's your culture. So you'll attract the right people for your culture. Thank you, Janet. Yeah, Janet, you make a good point. Sometimes people just want to talk. They're not looking for help. And I know that, when people come to me, that's the first question I ask. What do they want my role to be? Do they just need a safe place to vent? Or are they looking for me to strategize with them to help them figure out a path forward? And sometimes they're not ready for the path forward. They just kind of need to be with what's happening. My older son graduated from Virginia Tech last year in May, and he's got a great job with Deloitte. He's doing really well. When we were going through the college process, though, his first choice was UVA, and he didn't get in. And I mean, he was stunned because he's a pretty big overachiever, and it was really devastating for him. And when he came to me with the news that he was, not accepted and he wasn't even waitlisted, he didn't want any coaching from me. He just needed me to be there and sit with him in it. And then he came to me a few hours later and we were able to talk, but not, being able to hold space for someone is it's a real sacred gift that you give them when they're not ready to solve. Sometimes people just need you to hold space with them.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so what occurs to me, Marissa, is that this is somewhat of a dichotomy. So here we are at this 6-month mark where we're feeling, or you said a few minutes back that it's when our stamina drops, right? So what might have been something that was unconsciously competent as a leader, the ability to listen or reflect back or work collaboratively. Now we have to almost push into the conscious competence where we really have to think about this
We do.
in a more conscious way. Is that what you're finding in your work?
Oh yeah, yeah. The need to be compassionate, the need to, connect on a deeper level, the need to be empathetic, to be really listening with your eyes, your ears, your heart. I mean, this is what is required now of leaders. And they have to do it when they are also going through this difficulty, which is why the external support is so important and the self-care is so important, because they have to show up even when they're afraid of not knowing what's happening. They have to somehow show up as a place of support for everybody. So they're balancing human needs, they're balancing organizational needs, they're balancing their own needs. Leaders are being called on in many ways to rise above what they had to do before. Yep. Okay, so I'll just give you a minute or two to add some additional, and in case anyone wants to add, and then we'll move on. We're good on time. It's 12 o'clock, right on time.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, and I suspect that that need to be listened to is part of the reason that I see even more and more CEO roundtable groups cropping up.
Yeah. Yeah.
People just need to talk with their peers about what's going on.
Right. Okay, so you all know how to read. I'm not going to go ahead and read these bullet by bullet, but you have this here with some of the best practices. A lot of the things are things that you said, focus on what you can control, focus on the outcome, remembering things are impermanent, looking at the positives of situations, and then talking about the understanding, making sure that you're a safe space for your people. And as you guys have all done really well today, practicing that vulnerability that makes you more accessible and approachable. So I love this last quote: the higher a man is in grace, the lower he will be in his own esteem. So when we do move through life with grace, which really is an energy, if we move through that, we are in it with people. We are not separate as we may be when we are so focused on our own esteem and our own position. Allowing us to be in grace allows us to be fully connected with everybody that's around us. So this is a whole library that I've put together. These are some of the ink articles that I've written about moving through crisis, and articles on meditation and self-care. Some of my favorite podcasts, these are just a few of them. I have a whole slew of podcasts that I listen to. Some of my favorite TED Talks specifically on this topic: Brene Brown on vulnerability. Susan David is an excellent expert on emotional courage. And some blogs and some of my favorite books. I did have the Surrender Experiment in there, so that's good. I love Wayne Dyer. He's definitely one of my most important spiritual guides. And then I've got information in here on, what my company does for anyone who's interested, and on our Scale Academy, which is the Successful Culture Advanced Leadership Education Academy, and the different types of work. I do a lot of one-on-one leadership coaching. We do a lot of culture consulting. And as you can imagine, we're very busy right now with making sure that organizations are maintaining healthy cultures. And we've got 7 different modules that we provide online through our Scale Academy. We do a lot with unconscious bias. We do increase best practices for increasing self-awareness. Chris, I'm actually leading this for Maverick in November. I'm going to be leading a program on self-awareness in the Johari window for one of my communities. We do a lot on emotional intelligence and emotional resilience, giving and receiving feedback, communication strategies. So everything really that leaders need today, we provide through our Scale Academy. And we've got some additional programs that I like to do that are relevant to what's happening. I've got a leadership mindset program, which is 11 mindsets required to lead yourself and others to greatness. I created that a few years ago. Strategies for resilience, how to own your outcome in the midst of uncertainty, and then some books that we've written. I've written, and some information. And so I'll go back to the contact information. Oh, you got it. Okay. I was going to just put my contact information, but you all will get the slide.
Oh, yeah. And what, this is the point where you wanted to, well, and I'll send it out to folks as well.
Yeah, and we can just do some questions. If people, want to talk about what's going on in their own organizations, we've got some time, and I'm happy to do some on the spot coaching or brainstorming or ideating, sharing some of the best practices.
Right. And if anybody wants to actually talk, I do have the participants up so I can flip the switch.
Great. And please connect with me on LinkedIn too. I do a lot, I post a lot of, I try and post both strategic and inspirational content.
Right. So any comments for Marissa? Any questions for her as we're trying to take these key points and apply them? And I keep focusing on Q4 because that's part of the, part of what Marissa and I talked about was trying to give you some tools and resources for Q4. But, we can certainly talk about your plans for 2021 as well.
Yeah.
Since that's near and dear to my heart right now. What other questions do we have? The one thing that occurred to me, Marissa, was similar, I guess, to what we always say with the Rockefeller habits and scaling up. Having a discipline, so that you have an agenda item or you have a meeting rhythm that's going to keep you on track with this, because as we all know, we make our plans and then the work gets in the way. Is there some type of rhythm or discipline that you would suggest to people to incorporate into their meetings or their reflections? Like, again, what have you found to be most successful so that people don't forget?
Actually, there's a ritual or a practice that I would recommend for all meetings. And this is something that I learned from EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, from Forum. When we have meetings, I like to start the meeting and get a feel with a one-word open from everybody to kind of get a feel for where they are, how they're feeling going into the meeting. And based on that, I will tailor my information or, just try and do what I can to kind of raise the energy or the frequency of anyone that's in the meeting that is feeling maybe stressed or anxious. I'll give a little bit more care and attention to them. So, and then do a one-word close at the end of the meeting. So one word open, one word close is always a great practice to do, to be able to center people and get a read for where they are with their meetings.
Mm-hmm. It's a great best practice. Well, and back to the idea of the vulnerability sharing needs to happen first at the leadership level.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So
100%.
So for the CEOs that are on the line, you are the one who's modeling, folks.
Right. They're always looking to see how we're engaging and reacting. And yeah, but at the same time, they have to know that we're human. And so we don't have good days all the time. And we also are, we get fearful and we get weary and frustrated, and it's okay. We're human. I mean, I think this whole thing has really kind of, softened that divide, that bar between leadership and the employees, because we're all seeing each other in our home offices or our dining rooms or, just what's happening.
Carla's, I think everyone is just tired of 2020. That is.
Yeah, no, we are. No doubt.
It's yes, and it's not quite over at this point. Any other questions from
Janet raised her hand.
There we go. Oh, there we go. Thanks, Janet.
You know what? I think I did that by accident. I actually do have, I'll throw something out there. So I'm trying to mull through my mind. The people I'll use the quotes loosely, that are managing are not employees. So they're folks on a team that get to choose what they want their outcome to be in their own individual business.
Uh-huh.
And so, just do you have any perspectives? I mean, I think all this is really applicable, but do you have anything maybe that you could add in that regard to that, like how you would approach that? I love seeing where they're at. I think I often want to ask, where do we want to go today? What do you want to do? What do we want to accomplish? I just don't know if you have any insight on that for
So
me.
they don't work for you? Like are they contractors?
Yeah, I guess they're their own CEO of their own business, so to speak, and they're coming up into my team, and I'm their leader, but I don't set the bar for them. They get to decide where they want to go with their business.
So do they roll up to your values? Like, I mean, the people who represent your brand, these CEOs, are they aligned with your values? Is there?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
And I get compensated on what they achieve in their business. I get a portion of that, but so I do get paid for assisting them to reach their own goals. But they get to decide whether they want to set the world on fire or they just want to do a little bit, so it's all up to them.
Got it. And are you just one of many of their clients? Like, do they work for other companies?
Hmm.
No.
No. Okay.
It's a health coaching practice, right? And
Mhm.
so most of these folks are coming on as clients, and then they decide they want to become health coaches as well and bring in clients, help, coach their friends, family, people within their circle.
Right. Do they have quotas? I mean, or is it just completely
No.
No,
It's up to them
it's
completely.
up to them. So I'm happy to talk to you offline about it. If there are if you've got this question, I don't know if you're just generally seeking kind of general support, if you've got maybe a couple people in mind that you're concerned about, like what's compelling you to ask the question?
Yeah. I don't know. I think I'm really general, and now I kind of feel bad that I asked it because I think I'm probably unique in this group, and there's, I feel like I'm taking too much time.
No, you know what, Janet? That's a story you're telling yourself, though. You shouldn't feel bad. That's, I put it out there, and it's whatever the feedback you would get would be beneficial to everybody in one way or another. So, but I'm totally happy to do a call with you offline to, work you through maybe some ideas. But I appreciate you answering it
Thank you.
or asking it.
Yeah, gotcha. Thanks.
Sure.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks, Janet, for asking the question.
So Megan wrote, is this conversation we may have any different with clients versus employees that may be frustrated with lack of results? So Megan, do you have clients that are not satisfied? Is that what's happening? She wants to come off mute.
Oh, yes. Thank you. As I scroll through the names. There you go. You're good, Megan. You can join us.
Megan,
not video though, right? Marissa,
okay, don't worry about the video. It's all good. It's all good.
I think in what I'm doing is juggling a lot of different types of clients and different practices, and I think it might be perception. But I think that the hard conversations to understand where they stand or where I stand with them might be helpful, and I'm just not certain of having a conversation with empathy and compassion is necessarily the same with employees as it would be with a client.
No, absolutely. So are you sure that they're not happy, or you think that they're not happy?
I'm uncertain.
Okay, so you're looking for clarity.
Correct.
And I don't know, who's your customer? Like, what industry are you in?
I'm doing some business development for clients, so consulting.
Oh, okay. All right. So I'm assuming you have some type of arrangement worked out with.
Yes.
Okay, so is there a quota? I mean, are they expecting a certain amount?
I'm actually having a conversation this afternoon. That's why I'm actually asking with a particular client that it's an ongoing, and I don't think that it was clear during this time. It was a little bit of I guess March, April of they needed some business development. So I just need to have that conversation today, but I don't want to go in with empathy and compassion. I feel like that window has kind of closed.
No, I hear you. Okay, I wrote about, I've done a lot of writing for Inc. I'm going to actually very quickly pull up 2 of my articles and put the link in the chat if I can do that quickly.
Yeah.
When we're having a difficult conversation, the thing to focus on is begin with the end in mind. So if you can go in there with very clear end objectives, what you want to accomplish from that conversation, and work your way back.
Okay, that makes sense.
I'm pulling up the article right now that actually gives you the whole framework for that. Follow these 6 steps to take the stress out of difficult conversations.
So I'm leading the conversation with clarification of what the end in mind is of our goal, and it's just a reset and then working back.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've also found, Marissa, we've, that we always talk about calibration and the need to recalibrate in relationships, like, to go back to here's what we said, and someplace along the line. I mean, I just had this conversation yesterday with a CEO who was struggling with her team as well, and just acknowledge that, again, we're all human beings, we're all dealing with similar stressors and different, whatever they may be. And can we take this time to recalibrate, to get back on the same page?
Yeah, and the other thing that I would add to that, Cheryl, is when we're going into these conversations, it's so easy for us to walk into a conversation with stories that we've already told ourselves about what the other person thinks or feels or how the conversation is going to go. One of my most important books is The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And the second agreement is don't make assumptions. So when we can walk into any situation completely with that blank slate, try very hard not to tell ourselves stories, because the stories that we tell ourselves are going to direct how we show up in that conversation or in that experience, right? So the more that we can go into a conversation from a place of being curious and open to what might transpire, rather than already having a preconceived conversation before we walk in there, it really is about truly being open and curious to how it might unfold.
Yeah.
And also recognizing that when difficult questions come up in difficult conversations, we don't have to feel compelled to answer them in that moment. It's okay to say, that's a really good question. I need a little bit of time to process that. Can I get back to you? Especially if it's in a difficult conversation, our emotions are already highly charged. So giving ourselves like any space that we can in that conversation to not answer right away is really important.
That's a great point.
I hope, does that help, Megan?
It was great. No, thank you. The timing is perfect.
Okay, great. Well, make sure you copy down the links of my
I did. I already opened it. Thank you.
Okay, good. That gives you the framework.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? I'm trying to look at Q&A as well as comments and hand raises from folks. Not seeing anything.
Okay. Well, we've given you guys a lot to process. Oh, 2 people raised their hand, it says.
Well, there we go. Joseph.
Hi, Joseph.
Hi, how's it going? Actually, yeah, I was just kind of wondering, remembered, how do we kind of, now that we're, all kind of going back to the office soon, but doing a hybrid model and getting our external clients, our team members, our clients used to kind of being like, these are the office times. for the most part, and we're not just accessible through Zoom, Zoom and home and things
All
very
the
quickly.
time.
What's the I think we've done a good job of responding to that, but there is sometimes you don't want to be too presumptive or over bounds, and keeping that line for not only us but my team members, of saying, like, I need to stop myself from saying this needs to get done right now past 5-6 o'clock, or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
Kind of setting those boundaries. How would you kind of go about that in a better, more consistent stance than just not responding?
It's a great question, Joseph.
Yeah.
I mean, the more proactive that we can be with our employees and even our customers in this time, the better, because one thing I know for sure, what I've learned from my experience when I had 70 employees, is that when we don't communicate clearly, they will fill in the blanks themselves. And so the more that we can communicate, the more proactive that we can be with communication, and also asking them what they think, like doing the poll and the survey to say, well, what do you think we should be doing regarding, opening back up, and giving them an opportunity to have a voice is going to break down a lot of the emotional barriers that you have with your employees. Just know, Joseph, there's no one way to do this at all. And what works for your company may not work for another company, and allowing yourself to be fluid in all of it. So you might try something this week with your client engagement or your employee engagement coming in the office, and for one reason or another, it might not go well, and you have the right and the responsibility to shift it. So letting your people know that this is fluid, this is evolving literally in every day. I'm not a big football fan. I mean, I'm a Ravens fan, but I'm not like, I don't sit on the couch for 8 hours and watch football. The number of injuries that have happened in the NFL from the season opener is in the hundreds. And part of the reason that that's happening is because they didn't have a chance to practice, right? And so what's happening is we've got all these like second string and third string players that are now coming on the field, and the whole dynamic of the game just has completely changed with COVID being part of the equation now. And I think that leaders can learn a lot from what's happening in the NFL when they bring people back, and expect that someone's going to go from 0 to 60. That's what happened with these players. That's why there were so many injuries. I mean, the whole first week of the NFL season, I think by the end of week 2, there were 140 injuries. I was tracking it. And that's what happens when you bring people back into an environment that they've been out of for 6 months, and you expect them to pick up right where they left off before this happened. There's going to be problems. And CEOs and leaders need to understand that they can't just pick up where they left off. It's not open for business the way that it was. It has to look differently. And you guys are figuring it out literally as you go along. So it gets back to the compassion for yourself as a leader, compassion for your people, knowing that this is fluid in every moment.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joseph, for asking the question.
Was that helpful?
Very helpful. And yes, there's been a way too many injuries on all the teams.
I know, it's crazy. And and my kids are all in like the fantasy football.
And
The fantasy football leagues, I know, have been completely upended too with all of the injuries. So it's interesting, the ripple effects of all of this.
So if it would be great for those of you still on the call, if you just write down in the comment section your takeaways, those folks in
Sure,
the
that would be great. Yeah.
community know that I'm a big takeaway. Like, what's
Yeah.
your one takeaway from this?
Yeah.
This webinar would be lovely. As Marissa said, please reach out to her on LinkedIn. I put her LinkedIn profile in the chat. I'll send it out with the PDF of the slides. We'll get the recording out to everyone. And Marissa, is there anything else? You said, folks can certainly personally reach out to you as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
right?
Yeah, yeah. And I'm looking forward to seeing the takeaways.
I just want to say thank you very much to Marissa for taking the time today to be with us and be part of our thought leader community as we're continuing to work our way through 2020. It's not over yet. Also, we do have 2 more speakers this quarter. I want to send you to CEO Think Tank's website. Just click on events. Karen Kopp is going to be joining us and getting us back into the sales mode, and how to engage with your ideal customer on November 5th, I believe it is. And then Dave McGuire is going to be joining us at the end of the quarter to talk more about leadership in uncertain times. There's all your takeaways, Marissa.
Yeah, I know. No, it's great. I'm really glad I made an impact.
Yes, absolutely. Any other follow-ups for?
Football injuries are now stuck in my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, what we resist persists for sure.
Thanks, Eileen. Thanks, Carla. And the others. All right. Cool. All right, folks. It has been a pleasure being with you this afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.
Very much good luck with all of your conversations. Please, 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 as Marissa said, just decide to do one thing. One thing for yourself as a leader, one thing with your leadership team.
Yeah, can't pour from an empty cup. Got to take care of yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely.